Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from the Singapore Fintech Festival, and joining me for this segment, we have Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. We're here to discuss the future of cross-border transactions with blockchain integrated into traditional banking. Sergey, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Great to be here, thank you.
All right, you got it. Let's talk about the benefits of Project Guardian to tokenization of financial assets.
Yeah, so Project Guardian creates a good framework for legal transactions to actually occur, and that legality is very important for regulated financial institutions that need their transactions to be compliant. So basically the Guardian framework creates an environment in which you can do transactions that are compliant, which eliminates for those transactions the burdens of regulatory compliance in a larger sense, and that gives institutions the safety to do the transactions. And it's also a good framework and a good set of ideas about how to make those transactions work properly, that Chainlink is now part of and helping develop.
Well, let's talk about that. SWIFT and the UBS asset management pilot, how is that improving tokenized settlement?
So the UBS asset management pilot shows that a digital transfer agent can interact with multiple off-chain fund administration resources, so you can make the existing fund administration industry compatible with digital transfer agency on-chain. And then it shows how SWIFT messages can be used as a form of payment to do a subscription to a fund. So this means that SWIFT payments can be used as a way to subscribe to a fund and therefore to participate in the tokenized fund world. Mm-hmm. And this is pretty innovative because that means that the 11,000 plus bank members within the SWIFT network should be able to use SWIFT messages to allow their users to utilize various tokenized funds, which means that that very large user base is now able to use all the tokenized financial products that go on chain.
Right, so what about the role of Chainlink CCIP? How is that enabling this off-chain cash settlement for these tokenized funds? What's that role there?
So CCIP actually allows the final settlement to happen in terms of the asset being transferred. It handles a lot of the delivery part of the transaction. So the payments part of the transaction through SWIFT goes through the Chainlink abstraction layer, and in many cases now it'll go through the Chainlink CRE, the Chainlink runtime environment, and then that will result in a delivery of an asset, and if that asset needs to be delivered to a different chain, then CCIP handles that. So CCIP handles the delivery of the actual asset across chains, because it's a cross-chain interoperability system.
Right, so what do you see the future of cross-border transactions with blockchain? How do you see that being integrated into traditional banking?
I think traditional banks and asset managers have very large user bases that aren't going anywhere. And those traditional banks and asset managers want to give those user bases access to more and more on-chain financial products, but they want to utilize their existing infrastructure in order to do that. And in order to utilize their existing infrastructure to do that, they need a way to make it compatible with blockchains. That's basically the role that Chainlink plays in this context, is it allows their existing banking systems, payment systems, identity systems to be made compatible with blockchains, and therefore reusable for on-chain transactions, which means that once you complete an integration like that, you get that whole user base of that bank or that asset manager or that payment system like SWIFT in order for it to be made reusable and therefore that user base to be able to use the blockchain through that institution.
And we've discussed this before, but I think it bears repeating. What's the advantage of transaction confidentiality for these larger financial institutions?
So the Chainlink system has a number of privacy capabilities that keep confidential parts of the transaction confidential, that keep identity pieces confidential, all kinds of critical pieces of information basically remain private as needed. And in naming and remaining private as needed, you basically get the ability to do a transaction because certain identity information and other information, if it isn't kept private, it can't be used in the transaction. So the traditional financial industry is used to having privacy and confidentiality for their transactions, and Chainlink provides that confidentiality into the blockchain version of their transactions. And so it basically is another method of creating that compatibility where if you're used to having privacy in your existing systems, and now you need privacy on blockchain systems, you can not only get your systems to interact, but you can achieve the privacy that's required.
So it's almost like improving that user experience, so it's similar to what you're used to, and this is where the Chainlink technology and cross-chain, cross-border transactions comes into play.
Right.
Yeah. So what about the impact of the new ADDX and ANZ use cases? What's that going to have on the financial markets?
Well, that's actually a use case where we're using CCIP private transactions to actually do a transaction across 2 jurisdictions, so cross-border.
Right.
So what that shows is the ability for CCIP to generate a lot of cross-border compliance and privacy. So the ADDX ANZ transaction is something we've been working on for a while. It's now in the final, it's done, it's past the technical stages, it's now in the final kind of approval stages. And in the course of now getting approved to go to production, what we're seeing is that a lot of those compliance issues and privacy issues that are important, them being resolved is the critical component to now going to production. And the way CCIP is built and the way the whole thing was built is built to fulfill those compliance needs and those legal obligations of the transaction. So now we're in the final stages of that, but I think it'll be the transaction that proves that you can do private transactions cross-border in a way that's compliant. And so I think it's a pretty big deal.
So how does this position Chainlink in the evolution of global financial markets?
I think Chainlink is a standard and a protocol for facilitating transactions by providing various price data, providing identity, providing connectivity. And so what it does is it solidifies Chainlink as the way to do transactions in the capital markets, similarly to how it's the way to do transactions in the DeFi public chain world already, from a data point of view, from a connectivity point of view, from various points of view. So Chainlink's role is really to provide the protocol and the open source standard for how banks, asset managers, payment systems, clearing and settlement depositories can all interconnect, and how they can exchange information with each other on chain, and how they can exchange value with each other in order for those transactions to happen not in the off-chain world, but in the on-chain world. And that's a gradual process of enabling their existing systems to be made compatible, but every time you make one of those existing systems compatible, you unlock a user base.
Right.
And unlocking that user base is a big part of the value that Chainlink brings to the blockchain community overall. Every time we complete one of these integrations with a bank, an asset manager, a clearing and settlement depository, a payment system, that user base of that kind of bank or asset manager or CSD now is available to use on-chain assets, which grows the total market of the blockchain industry.
All right, appreciate the insight as always, Sergey. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from the Singapore Fintech Festival. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks for having me.